Good morning. With the help of Hashem, we are learning Yerushalmi Terumos, Perek Yud, Halacha Aleph, and Halacha Beis. We're learning today Daf Tzadik Beis. We left off on Tzadik Beis, Amid Aleph, all the way on top of the Amid. What we just left off learning is that we have a machlokes between Rabbi Meir and Rab Shimon. Rab Shimon, Omer, Kol Noisnei Tam. When it comes to the topic of Tam, not the Iker. So Rab Shimon is the one that says that if it's Lishvach, it's Aser. If it's Livgam, it's Mutter. Rav Meir says, Bein Lishvach, Bein Lipgam, Aser. And I know, Chevra, that with those of us who learn Shulchan Aruch, we know that we paskin like Rab Shimon, but b'di'evet, not lechatchila. But let's focus on Rabbi Meir. Rab Meir seems to say that there's no difference whether it's Lishvach or Lipgam. The fact that something prohibited imparted flavor and something permitted, if the flavor is discernible, now we know that would be generally if the quantity of the prohibition is less than 1/6, is more than 1/60th, in the permitted, bein l'shvach, bein l'pegam aser. However, there's a machlekes amayroyim in how to understand pshat in Rabbi Meir. As we just learned yesterday, Reish Lakish is the one that says, why does Rabbi Meir say Bein Lepigam Aser? That's only when first it was nice and tam l'shvach. We gave the example of vinegar and beans. And even though afterwards you did another act of cooking the beans in the vinegar, and now let's say the truma vinegar is poigem the beans, it's going to be Aser because when the item, in our case truma, went into the chulin, at the moment of contact, it was lishvach. Reish Lakish says that even Rav Meir will be moidem, that if it first was nois and tam lifgam, even if later it's going to give a nois and tam lishvach, it's going to be mutter. Wow. Rabbi Yechanan argues with that. Rabbi Yechanan learns that Rav Meir means what he says literally, and as we spoke out, whether it's poigem mitchilosei va'atzoifei, Rabbi Yechanan holds that Rab Meir holds that doesn't matter. It's still going to be Aser. Now, what we're going to go today from the top of Tzadik Beis until the Mishnah is to point out how this machlokes Rabbi Yechanan and Reish Lakish is very consequential in understanding our Mishnah. Obviously, in the last case of our Mishnah, when we spoke about the barley truma that fell into a pit of water, and it spoils the water. It's nice and tam lepgam. And our Mishnah says that a non-kohen is allowed to drink the water. Can our Mishnah go lekula alma, or can our Mishnah only go according to the opinion of Reb Shimon? That is really dependent on the machlokes between Rabbi Yechanan and Reish Lakish, as we'll see, obviously, until the Mishnah. So in other words, Daf Tzadik Beis on the top is basically concluding the sugya, which is huge in Yoreh Deah, of nois and tam lepgam. And the next Mishnah, Halacha Beis, which will be the bulk of today's year, going into, God willing, next year, is going to be into another huge topic in Yoreh Deah. And I just want to speak again, for people that learn smicha, there's something called reicha, and there's something that's called zeya. These two words were not born in the times of the Gemara. In the times of the Gemara, including the Gemara we're going to learn today, including the commentators on the Mishnah and the Gemara, everything is going to be referred to as reicha. Reicha means aroma. The sugya of reicha is in chulin and in trumais right now. But what's the sugya of reicha? Guys, this is mamish relevant. If you have an oven, that's the Gemara in chulin. And in the oven, you have two pots, one of kosher meat, one of treif meat. And you kept them in the oven at the same time. We're not talking about meat that's saturated in water. We're speaking about meat. Meat is going to be considered something that's solid, and that's very consequential, halacha l'maisa. But we all know that even though it's solid, you're kidding, you open up an oven, you can smell the meat. The Gemara wants to know whether the kosher meat becomes treif. And Levi is the one that says that it does not, it remains kosher. The aroma of the treif goes into the kosher, yeah, that's called reicha. And Levi says, reicha lav milsei. And by the way, we paskin, b'di'evet, we paskin like Levi. I know that we're very careful. I know that we don't put kosher treif in the oven at the same time. In the airplane, we do it because it's wrapped. That's not a problem. Now, the Rosh is the one that begins to differentiate, guys, remember this, between Reicha, aroma, and Zeya. Zeya means, literally Zeya means sweat, but Zeya means steam. The Rosh holds that if the item that's not kosher is liquid or perhaps very liquidy, and now with the heat, it isn't only that the aroma is going out of something that's problematic, but you have steam going out, that's much worse. In other words, even though we paskin like Levi b'diavad that the reicha lav milsahi, by zeya, by liquids, will be a lot more machmer. This difference was born by the Rosh. It came from the Rosh, that means it comes from the Rishonim. What we're going to learn about in our Mishnah, and it's going to be our Mishnah and Trumais and a Mishnah and Machshirin, and we will equate them. Our Mishnah will be speaking about someone taking bread, chulin bread, and in our Mishnah we're speaking about hot chulin bread. Really, we're going to see that it's not about hot. Cold chulin bread will be the same. The Gemara will explain why the Mishnah said hot. And you place bread on an open barrel of truma wine. The bread is not physically touching the wine, but the aroma of the wine goes into the bread, reicha. And again, I know that it's liquid, and I know that if the liquid would have been hot, we would today, for those of us who learn smicha, we'll call this a zeya issue, which is much worse. But in our Mishnah, we're not talking about hot wine. We're speaking about cool wine. So there's no zeya issue, it's only reicha. And by the way, when you're going to eat the bread, you're going to taste the flavor of the wine. Based on the rule that reicha lav milsa, it's not considered something substantial, it won't be a problem. Really, in our Mishnah, there's a machlekes Rav Meir and Rabbi Yehuda. That's really the machlekes, whether reicha milsi, reicha lav milsi. Similarly, in Machshirin, there it's a little bit different. There were, any product that grew from the ground can only become susceptible to becoming tamei if first it was made wet, b'ritzoyin haba'olim, with any one of the halachic 7 liquids. So there the question will be, you have clay barrels. I'm saying clay dafka. This does not apply to metal. Clay barrels are porous, and the liquid from one side, on some level, permeates and goes out from the other side. Now, I know that many times when you fill up a metal container, you're going to have sweat on the other side. But my coffee is not coming out from this side. All right, it's the heat and the moisture of the air, something else. We're speaking about where there was some sort of penetration from the liquids through the utensil, through a clay utensil. Even our clay utensils are glazed. It wouldn't happen today. I'm talking in the times of Chazal. And there the issue is, if you have produce on one side of the keli and you have liquid on the other side, is the produce considered mukhshir l'kabel tumah? And we are equating whether the water is substantial enough to halachically still be considered liquid going through the other side. And our Mishnah, whether the aroma of the wine goes into the bread, we're gonna say that one is very much the same with the other. Whoever is machmer here is going to be a machmer there. Whoever is mekel here is going to be mekel there. That's more or less the whole daf today. So basically today we're concluding the sugya of Nois and Tam Gam, and we are opening up the topic of Reicha / now Zeya. Okay, so let's go on top of the Amid, Daf Tzadik Beis. This discussion was had when they were learning Masechtas Arla. And when they were learning Masechtas Arla, they quoted our Mishnah and Trumais. And that's why this discussion, even though Rabbi Yechanan, who compiled the Yerushalmi, put it in Masechtas Trumais, but this begins with the words Taman Taninan. We learned over there. Over there does not mean Arla. No. When they were learning Arla, they were quoting Trumais. So they said there, meaning from here. That if a Truma barley fell into a pit of water, again, a pit means water that's standing, even though what happens is a fact. I mean, obviously it has to do with quantity. But if there is enough quantity of so'irim vis-a-vis the water, the taste, the tam of the barley goes into the water. Halachically, we consider this tam to be detrimental to the water. That's the meaning of the words hiv ishu. Doesn't mean to dry, it means spoiled. That's a typical example of noisen tam libgam. No one is going to allow a non-kohen drink it before you remove the barley. Again, the ikar is a problem. Remove the barley. But now the taste of the barley is in the water. What's the question? Can a non-kohen have the water? Our Mishnah said categorically, Meimav mutarin, based on the rule, Noisen Tam Levgam is going to be mutar. Now, even though I guys remember that in halacha we say Noisen Tam Levgam is mutar b'di'evid, the water is a b'di'evid. Because what are you going to do? Either you're going to use it or you're going to have to throw it out. That's called b'di'evid. When we say noisen tam lavgam lechatchila, you got to deal with it. That would be today on the utensil. In other words, do you have to kasher the utensil? I would say yes. If meat fell into a milchik kekeli, the milchik kekeli was not used for. I'm going to get into that machlekes rishonim. Let's say for 24 hours, even though it's not exact, not according to Rashi, but let's go with the 24 hours. So is the keli basar b'chalav? If the meat went into the keli when the keli was on the fire, there was heat. So we say, b'di'evet, it's okay. What does it mean, b'di'evet, it's okay? Go kasher the utensil. But if you didn't kasher the utensil and you make food, the option now is only throw it out or eat it. You can eat it. Okay, but coming back over here. So now, guys, Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish either argued about our Mishnah when they were arguing what is Rab Meir, or they argued in another place. In Masechtos Arla, it doesn't matter what the topic there is. And our Gemara is now going to say that their machlekes in Arla is consequentially going to define who our Mishnah follows. Either or they themselves spoke about our Mishnah. The first version is that Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish were not focusing on our Mishnah. When they learned about Rab Shimon and Rav Meir, they had an argument. What is Shitas Rabbi Meir? So now, Adam Asnisa Mahi, who does our Mishnah follow? So according to Rabbi Yochanan is the one that says that Rab Meir categorically says, Noisen Tam Lipgam is Aser. Our Mishnah says, Meimav Mutarin. That means that our Mishnah can only be Rab Shimon, which means that Rabbi Yochanan will say that our Mishnah is subject b'machloikas. That's the meaning of the words b'machloikas. Everything is cryptic in the Yerushalmi. For people that have the art school, it's easy. But I'm telling you, that's why people had a hard time learning it. In other words, tolui b'machloikas. But according to Rab Shimon ben Lakish, who says that even Rav Meir will be moida, that if the item, in our case the truma, when it has contact with the water, from the outset, it's poigemit, even Rav Meir will be moida that it's mutter. So according to him, our Mishnah can be divrei hakol. Now, that's the first version of the Gemara that will not be refuted. What the Gemara will add right now, Rabbi Yossi ben Abun is adding that he had in his tradition that Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish were not debating only about Rab Meir and Rab Shimon. And then we need to have us to say, aha, now who does our Mishnah follow? Talui Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish. According to Rabbi Yossi ben Abun, Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish lechatchila argued when they learned our Mishnah. They learned our Mishnah, and Reish Lakish right away said, made it clear, our Mishnah is divrei hakol. So Rabbi Yochanan told him, no, Rav Meir says asur. He said, no. Rav Meir only said it's asur b'shishbiach tchila. That Elaine Shmu Asa, their argument of Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish was directed by them of Hachi. That Rabbi Yochanan said that our Mishnah is subject to a machlokes, and Rab Shimon Amar divrei hakol. Okay, I just want to add one more detail again. For it's important to know this, Aviv. You're going to learn smicha. Okay, the words of 24 hours. So first of all, loisen tam lebigam in our case is very simple. The barley in water doesn't upgrade the taste of the water. Who determined that? Chazal. I want to make that clear. No, it's even though you can have one person that says, well, I like the taste of water that had barley in it. Okay, he's an anomaly. Objectively, the Torah says it's spoiled. That's barley and water. Now, my example, meat and milk, or treifa meat in chveis and rice is not poigemit. It doesn't spoil it. It gives the taste of meat in it. And nevertheless, we say that any item whose taste is absorbed in a utensil, not the item itself. My meat doesn't get ruined in 24 hours, especially with refrigeration. But the taste of the meat that's swallowed in my utensil gets, to some level, degraded after it's not a ben yoimai, those are the words, ben yoimai, not me'es la'es. And after it's not a ben yoimai, now let's say if I'm going to cook macaroni and cheese by mistake in a fleishik pot, if the pot was not used for fleishiks in the ben yoimai, b'di'evet, the food will be okay. Why? Because the tam of the meat is poigem the tam of all of the food that's in the pot. Noisen tam levgam. And to make it clear, pagam doesn't mean bad. Pagam means that it used to be better and now it's getting worse. There's a downgrade in the added taste. How much time has to pass? The Gemara says, Kaylee, that's yes a ben yoimai or not a ben yoimai. So when by the way, we paskin, ben yoimai means 24 hours. I know that. Just to remind ourselves, we learned this. I remember speaking about this. That Rashi writes, I think in Chulin, ben yoimai means overnight. It's very consequential. According to Rashi, if the pot was used, let's say 4 p.m. for inflatics, and 8 a.m. I cooked macaroni and cheese. According to Rashi, b'di'evet, I can have the macaroni and cheese. That's called b'di'evet. Why? Because it's not ben yoimai. Because it was used prior to the night for fleishiks, and a night went over. It's not about 24 hours. So that's a kula. According to Rashi, I have a chumrah. What happens if it was used for fleishiks, let's say 3 a.m., middle of the night? It didn't overnight. You only had the end of the night. When will the pot be already noisen tam levgam? According to Rashi, not 24 hours, but 28 hours, 27 hours. The next morning, 6 a.m. No, according to Rashi, it's not about me'es la'es. That's a big machlekes. We don't paskin like Rashi. But people who really learn properly, most of us didn't have that amount of time yet. When you learn the Tur and the Beis Yosef brings down all of the shitos, that is helpful because there are many times that you need to make a heter. So when it's not a ben yoimei according to the way we paskin, but if it's already considered a ben yoimei l'shitas Rashi because it was overnighted, then sometimes with another heter you put 2 and 2 together and you can paskin l'kul. That's a good rav. You have a sniff. You have to have various sources to make something lenient. But anyways, atkan the sugya b'chlal, even just to know that it's a machlekes Rameir and Rab Shimon is already very important. Which, by the way, makes it worse because once you hear that Rav Meir says noisen tam levgam is asur, and as a rule, Rabbi Yochanan and Ish Lakish we paskin like Rabbi Yochanan, so it's not so pashit. Like some people make from the b'di'evet alachatchila, don't do that because according to Rav Meir, according to Rabbi Yochanan, there's no such a heter of noisen tam levgam. Okay, new Mishnah. Now again, the word that we're going to be using throughout is reicha. The source of reicha in the Bavli that I remember is when you cook 2 pots in the oven at the same time. On the side, many poskim say that even according to Levi, that says reicha lav milsa, in our modern ovens, Levi would be machmer. I forgot who says that, but I remember this way back when I learned smicha. That's very important because they say that our ovens are much smaller than the ovens that they had in the times of the Chazal. In the times of the Chazal, you read in the Gemara, most people didn't have an oven in their home. Even though some people had that. They had the Tanu, they had the Kirayim, but the common was you had these big communal ovens that were in the middle of the city. You can walk into them, right? Mar Ukva walked into an oven with his wife. So that's a big difference because the proximity and also the ovens are sealed today. It's a modern world. So maybe that's something else. You have to be careful. But let's go with the source. You had 2 pots in the oven at the same time. And Levi says that even though 1 pot was treifa meat, the kosher meat remains kosher. Even if you can taste, so he says the taste did not come from something substantial. The taste comes from reicha. I'm going to translate the word reicha as aroma. Now, by the way, even meat is not dry like a rock. So there is some moisture that comes out, but we're going to call that reicha. I'm saying that in contrast to liquids, that the Rosh's liquids gives off what he calls zayah. Zayah is much worse than reicha. We don't have that nafkamina here in the Gemara. Not in the Mishnah, not in the Gemara. So let's go. Haroida paschama. If the word roida means when they would bake bread by sticking it to the inside wall of ovens, and removing the bread from the walls is called the Roida Pas. The Dias Hapas, we learned about this in Masechta Shabbos, whether it's called the Malacha, whether it's called the Chachma, to do it on Shabbos. But coming back over here is the Mishnah, for some reason, is emphasizing that the bread is hot. We will see in the Gemara, it has nothing to do with hot or cold. There's a reason why the Mishnah writes hot, Kiddush. But that's the Mishnah. So if you have a hot loaf of bread, we're talking about a bread of chulin, and you place the bread on the opening of a barrel. The barrel has truma wine. Aviv, why would you place the opening over there? Because you want for the aroma. I'm going to use the words aroma, even though when you take, it's the taste. You want for when you eat the bread, it should taste like wine. But the wine did not touch the bread. If the wine touched the bread, then the wine goes into the bread. Then, of course, a non-kohen cannot eat it. But that's not what happened here. But the aroma goes into it. That's the classic reicha. That's less problematic, yeah. So very good. So we paskin like Levi that reicha lav milsa, very good. But we're jumping ahead. But this would be a classic case of reicha. And in our Mishnah, we have a machlekes between Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Meir says that it's aser. Rabbi Meir holds. Now, I want to say something, Dan. Even if you say reicha lav milsa, even according to Levi, could be over here, Pasha, the nature of bread and wine is that the Rabbi Meir holds that the bread actually draws some wine into it. What goes into the bread is more than reicha. That's the way I'll word it. Reicha lav milsa. Rabbi Yehuda is the one that says that it's mutter. Rabbi Yehuda is the one that holds that only the aroma entered. And now that I want to say just for you, Dan. That's one way of learning it. If the Marav Fulda doesn't say that, the Marav Fulda says what you said. Look inside the Marav Fulda. Rav Meir oiser the savar reicha milsehi. Okay, Rabbi Yehuda matir the savar reicha lav milsehi. That's another way of learning, and this is okay. Now another shita. Rabbi Yosi, he differentiates. He says that if the bread is made out of wheat, then you are allowed to have the bread. But if the bread was made out of barley, then you're not allowed to have the barley bread. Why? Avos means that the bread then draws the wine into it. For sure, by Rabbi Yosi, the way, let's go, it's not that Rabbi Yosi says, Rabbi Yosi holds reicha lav milsehi. But even though reicha lav milsehi, it's worse than reicha. You asking about it's worse. It draws it in. Again, how can there be a machlokes and mitzias? It's always that same answer. There is no machlokes and mitzias. If you would ask a scientist, he would tell you that actually something of the wine goes into the bread, something goes into the bread. There's a question whether halachically that's called wine or that's called the aroma of wine. Now, another din, I forgot to mention in the introduction. The next din is based on a rule that we just learned, the difference between Truma and Hegdesh and Avodah Zarah. That Hegdesh and Avodah Zarah is Asur Bahana. Truma is not Asur Bahana for Zorim. Truma is not prohibited for a non-kohen to benefit from. So the Mishnah gives a Gavaldik case. You have an oven, that the oven was heated, it was fired up with kamoin, with cumin, it was made out of Truma. We're not speaking about a kohen that did something wrong. Either he did something wrong, or it was an item that was tamei, and the only thing the kohen can do with it is using it as fuel, or it got ruined, not tamei, but it's not edible, whatever happened, or wrong or right. Bottom line is there's an oven that was heated up with truma. And now, while it had that heat, bread.
Would this be truma tamea?
What was that?
Would this be truma tamea?
Either truma tamea, Danny, or the cumin became spoiled. Another reason why, or Danny the kohen should not have done it, but he did it. Doesn't matter. Point is that now you have an oven that's heated up with truma, and consequentially bread was baked. So the Mishnah says hapas muteres. Why is the bread muter? Number one, because this is the key, because truma is not prohibited for a non-coin to benefit from. Truma is not asur bahana. Hegdish is asur bahana. Lahavdal, avodah zarah is asur, not truma. No one is eating it. But now you have another issue. Okay, you can have hana, but you taste the cumin in the bread. So here again, the Mishnah says that's only called reicha. Reicha lav milsi. She'ein tam kamoin. There's no flavor. If it would be the flavor, that was the whole thing. And leisim tam. Leisim tam, we just learned there's a problem. Lepegam, it's okay, maybe. But l'shvach is a problem. It's not called tam. It's less than tam. This is called reach. Tam is more substantial. Reich is less substantial. Ela reich kamoin. And again, the Marafulda says, "V'reich alav milsihi." Ay ve'im mishum shehu sekatanur boy. That's not a problem. Ein hatruma isur hana. Okay, Gaval. Says the Gemara, Amar Rab Zeiro. I want you to know that Bo'un Kome Rabbi Yanai, they asked the following question to Rabbi Yanai. Our Mishnah spoke about placing bread, a hot bread, on top of an open barrel. I have another question. They would have closed barrels. The barrels then were commonly made out of clay. Clay is considered porous, not glazed clay. An earthenware utensil, unglazed. You can even buy them today. You'll pay a lot more money for it, right? To health people, because that has a lot more poison in it that we'll find out in 10 years from now. So here you had a barrel filled with wine all the way to the top. They put the clay cover on the top, and they put bread on top of the clay cover. That's not the topic of our Mishnah. Our Mishnah was bread was placed on an open barrel, and the bread is not touching the wine. Here, the bread is laying on the cover, and under the cover, you have wine, you have liquid. Will we say the same thing? Now, according to Rabbi Yehuda, they didn't ask that question. Rabbi Yehuda, what does Rabbi Yehuda hold in our Mishnah? Rabbi Yehuda says that matir, not a problem. Not a problem. According to Rabbi Meir, that's the question. Will Rabbi Meir prohibit the bread? And the Gemara is going to say, yes, he will. How do we know that? Amarloin, Yagid olav reyo. Yagid olav reyo are words from a pasuk in Iyuv. Yagid olav reyo is an expression that's used a lot when there's a topic being asked in halacha aleph, but we don't know it from halacha aleph. But there is a halacha beis that's considered a friend or a brother because they have similarities, and that is clarified in halacha beis. So we say Yagid olav reyo, the friend will reveal the answer. In other words, there's another Mishnah that's similar to ours. So the Gemara wants to know, Ma Yagad Olav Rega, what Mishnah are you referring to? How can we answer your question? It's a Mishnah in Machshirin. What do we learn over there? Befedish. Now we're quoting a Mishnah there. There are two scenarios. They're very similar. Either the barrel, this type of clay barrel, is filled with produce, and it's closed, and someone threw the closed, sealed barrel inside a bigger barrel of water or of a liquid. What's the issue then? Do we say that enough liquid went through the barrel, touched the produce, and therefore now the produce is susceptible to becoming tummy? Or in the opposite direction. The opposite direction is you have a pile of produce, pile of wheat, and you have a clay container filled with water, closed, and you threw the barrel of water inside the pile of grain. In other words, it makes no difference whether the liquid is on the inside and the produce is in the outside, or the other direction. And over there says the Mishnah. Now, I want to tell you something. Time is a factor there. Is time a factor by the bread in the barrel? I don't know. I think it's a factor. I think if you put it for a second, I don't know. Over there, the Mishnah writes that if you have moisture in the produce, it became mukshal like kabel tumah. And we're going to go on the presumption that that Mishnah is not Rabbi Yehuda. That Mishnah is following Rav Meir. Stam Mishnah Rav Meir. So just like you find over there, that the liquid that goes through the clay barrel is substantial enough for you to consider, for you to say, it's still liquid that was machsharit. Same thing will be over here, that if you place the bread on top of the cover, even though it's covered, the Gemara is going to add, but the liquids in the barrel go all the way to the cover. and the bread is laying directly on the cover. These two parts that I said, the Gemara is going to add right now. Like in the Mishnah and Machshirin. In other words, there can't be any airspace, not between the liquid, in our case, the wine and the cover, the inside of the cover, nor between the bread and the top of the cover. Sometimes you can suspend bread. If there's any amount of airspace, then it's not going to be a problem. But if the liquid is touching the bottom part of the cover and the bread is touching the top, then we are equating the Mishnah and Machshirin and our question by saying they're both the same, that according to Rav Meir, yes, a non-kohen will not be allowed to have the bread. That's what the Gemara is saying. Come on,
Rabbi,
excuse me?
Isn't there a qualifier there that it says that if the produce was found to be wet?
Yes.
Meaning you have actual evidence that it
here the
happened.
Evidence, Danny, will be I'm going on that the aroma of the wine will be in the bread. There'll be some time in the bread. L'choira, that would be the evidence. I think you need that. I think it's a time factor. There has to be a time factor. It takes time for this to happen. It's not a sponge. It's a utensil. It's a hard utensil. It's porous. Let's go over here. Kamo da'at omer tamon. So now we're adding. If you want to compare our case to their case, okay, just like in Machshirin, when do we say in whichever direction that the produce that's wet, we consider that moisture substantial, and it's mukhshar sheyehei hamashkin noigin b'chavius, that the liquids are touching the inner walls of the barrel. Here also, so you want to speak about, the barrel was covered. The barrel was covered, but the wine inside went all the way to the cover. You got it? So if the wine went 99% to the top of the barrel, but there is a little bit of airspace in between the wine and the cover, then even according to Rav Meir, it will not be problematic. Now in our Mishnah, there's airspace, shkoyach. In our Mishnah, there's no cover. In our Mishnah, the chavius is open. That's a big difference. And to daf tzadik beis amud beis in both directions. And Amar Rav Mana also, I agree with you, but let's just speak out the other side. Umina, let's take it further. The bread that's on top of the cover has to be touching the cover and not suspended from the ear near the cover. Kamo de teimad, just like over there. Now we're going to take out the word mashkin. The liquid has to be touching one side, whichever side, and the produce has to be touching the other side. When do we say that according to Rabbi Meir, the bread will not be allowed to be eaten by a non-kohen, that the bread has to be touching and not hanging above it, and not hanging, that's very important. Now says the Gemara, now let's go back to our Mishnah. Our Mishnah, the Mishnah says, Haroy de Paschamo, hot bread. When they asked that question to Rabbi Yana and he made that comparison between Machshirin, in Machshirin there's no heat involved. So now that you're making a comparison, Yagad Olav Reyoy, that should also clarify, Milsei Amra, Rabbi Yana, who made that comparison, it has to be Afilo B'Tzeinenes. That's amazing. Look inside Maraful, the 3 lines from the top, that Afilo B'Tzeinenes Pligi. Pligi means our Mishnah is Machlokes between Amen and Rabbi Yehuda, cannot be only if the pas is chama, because now that you said that the nil moed mahasam, now that the Gemara is taking it as a given, and no one is challenging it, that we compare Masechtas Trumos with Masechtas Machshirin, and over there in Machshirin, and nevertheless we say that somehow the produce on the other side of the clay utensil draws out enough water, so therefore it must be that our Mishnah also is even if the bread is cold. And the Gemara says, I'll tell you better. Amar Abibah, that there was once a halacha l'maisa shayla. That someone placed bread that was cold on top of a barrel. B'tzeinenes hava uvda. And you know who they asked the shayla to? To Rabbi Yanai. No. Someone put cold bread on top of an open barrel, and they asked Rabbi Yanai, what will be the din? And Rabbi Yanai, by the way, be paskin like Rabbi Meir. And Rabbi Yanai says, I'm saying that because even though Rechalav Milsa here it's more than that. Here we say that the bread actually absorbs some of the wine. So Rabbi Yanai said that the bread is also to non-kohanim. So the fact that Rabbi Yanai paskin the case of our Mishnah even by pas soinenes means that your luzak's good. But now we got a problem. If that's the case, then the Mishnah should have said a bigger chiddush. Why would that Mishnah say pas chama if it's even seinenes? So the Gemara says you have a big misunderstanding. Normally, you know what you say, Aviv? Normally you say heat is worse than cold. When it comes to the transference of taste, heat is worse than cold. By cold, you have to have at least soaking for 24 hours. By heat, we don't have that. Here, it's the opposite. Here, one might have thought, listen to these words. When bread is smoking hot, smoke is going in what direction? When smoke is going from the inside to the outside. So one would have argued that since the pas is chama and it's busy going in the direction of milmata l'mayla, at that moment, I did the tada l'miflat leibala. We have that concept in other areas in Allah. At that moment, it won't be able to absorb anything. So the Mishnah is telling you a chiddush that even when the pas is chama, it still will absorb. That's what the Gemara. I tell you why chama is the chiddush. The word koivish means that emanating, there's hevel, and the hevel should suppress. Should suppress meaning when it's going in out, it should not allow anything to go in. You might have thought it's mutter. So the Mishnah is machadesh that according to Rab Meir, the problem is even by paschama. By tzleinenes vada, it's problematic, and no one is going to challenge that. Okay. Now, from the Mishnah Machshirin, we see that we're going now to the Mishnah Machshirin, that when you have the clay barrel, which is the typical clay cheres barrel, not glazed, the typical clay cheres, for sure clay adama, that liquids go through the porous of the utensil enough in whichever way, so the produce on the other side, if everything is touching, becomes mukshar. So Rav Shimon ben Lakish limits that din. And he differentiates between water and all of the other 6 liquids. There's a total of 7 liquids. The mnemonic is yad, shachad, dam. And water, by the way, is more fluid. It's more watery than any of the other liquids. All of the other liquids are considered to be thicker. Now, I get it with wine. I get it. I don't see how that is with dew, for example. But what do I know? Let's go over here. So Rav Shimon Lakish Shoymar. I want to tell you something. Only mayim oisin peiris. It's amazing how they spoke words. Oisin what? Oisin mukhshar. They abbreviate it. But all other of the mashkin, that means you have a total of 7 liquids, the other 6 liquids, even if you have the same scenario, you have a barrel, you have a pile of wheat, and someone had a barrel filled with wine, and someone threw the wine inside the pile of produce. The whole Mishnah in Machshirin does not apply. Umashkin einois and peiris. Now, let me tell you something. The word the law, what does the law normally mean, Aviv? No. Here it means yes. The word the law is da elo. Now that we equated our Mishnah with Machshirin, what liquid was our Mishnah referring to? Yayin. So says our Gemara, well, the statement of Reish Lakish, Dilla means da ella can only go according to Rabbi Yehuda. Why is that? Because Rabbi Yehuda's matter the wine. Now you get it. You know why Rabbi Yehuda's matter the wine? Because Rabbi Yehuda will hold, wine is too thick. If anything is only the aroma, the wine itself is not going to go into the bread. We are making them the same. But according to Rabbi Meir, that says that even with wine, the wine goes into the bread. So then if wine would be in the barrel, the produce will also become moksha. That's step number 1. Gavaldik. I think I froze over here on the machine. Elo, Rab Shimon Lakish Amar. The Gemara says, let me tell you what Rab Shimon Lakish is saying. That mayim oisin peiros v'chaserim. That when you have water, not only will the water be machshir the produce, but actually the water in the barrel or the water outside the barrel will actually be decreased in value. I'll tell you what he wants to say with that. All the other liquids will also be oisin peiros. Makes no difference as far as being machshir. Any liquid will be machshir. But because of them being thicker, much less liquid goes through. You know how little liquid goes through? That you won't even discern that the water decreased. The Einam Chaserim. Gavaldi. And now the Gemara says that Reish Lakish's statement will not be like Rabbi Yehuda, the opposite direction, not da elom, nish like Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda Aimer, ein mashkin oisen peiris koliker. It's now that we equated our Mishnah and the Mishnah and Machshirin. What does our Mishnah say? What does Rabbi Yehuda say that a non-kohen can have it? So it comes out that Rabbi Yehuda is of the opinion that no liquid ever permeates. The whole Mishnah and Machshirin only follows Rabbi Meir. That's very important. So not that the Reish Lakish only follows Rabbi Yehuda. No, Reish Lakish only follows Rabbi Meir. Now, what is Rabbi Lakish trying to say? Okay, so the Machshirin speaks about Rabbi Meir, and all liquids are Machshir. So l'may nafkamina, guys, why would Reish Lakish say, but water, you'll see it being decreased. By other liquids, you won't see it being decreased. The answer is, and this has to be, guys, that there's a time factor. You can't say that if you have one of the cases in Machshirin, you have a pile of produce, and you have these, today you have water bottles in plastic and poison, then you had it in clay cheres. Someone threw such a clay cheres utensil in the pile. What, you're telling me the whole pile will become muksher? It doesn't make sense if it's there for 2 seconds. So the Shlakish is telling
especially
you,
if it's not moist.
And even if it's moist, if it's too little moist, like did the moisture come from the water? So he says that by water, the water should decrease. Which means that if the water did not decrease, you can say the produce is not muksher. That's what Reish Lakish is telling you. He's giving you a siman to know whether there was enough time. So that, in other words, it's not enough, Danny, for it only to be moist. What's the word of the condensation? Maybe the moisture came from condensation. When two things of different temperatures touch each other, then the liquid in the air, there's water in the air. And Eretz Yisrael, they made machines, you put it in the air and it gives you water. It's gavaldik. So Reish Lakish is coming to give you a tip that if there isn't a decrease in the water, by mayim, that's a raya that it's not muksher. Okay. Now.
And what about if it was wine? Then
by wine, you don't have such a siman. You don't have that because even if it stayed there for enough time for it to be machshir, you would never notice the decrease. You wouldn't notice it. It's not discernible.
The wine still goes out.
The wine goes out. Yes. Yes.
I can't go out without
because it goes out so little that you cannot discern it. Maybe in modern machines you can discern. It's about without these new machines. You know, it's something visible today with these glasses. You can see anything. Yeah. With a magnifying glass, whatever is naked to the eye, that's what counts. Whatever is the way God made us, the way we are.
And it's like for wine, for example, with I actually never mind.
Whether some or not, that's what Danny was pointing out. The Mishnah there says if the produce is dry, it's not going to be mosher. The produce is moist. The question is it condensation or is it from the liquid? And if it's from the liquid, then it's a problem. Let's go right.
Did we go from a what sounded like a chumrah with water to a kula with water?
Yeah.
Originally we were saying just
Danny.
water.
Very good. We went in the opposite. We're saying by water, there's an advantage that it's easier to be lenient. It's easier to discover. By other liquids, it's harder. Yes. Very good. Now, a story. Rabbi Yechanan shared, this is the normal Agadah in Yerushalmi. That Rabbi Yishaya the Great, he was the Rebbe, he was the teacher in Kaserin, right? The expensive city that we learned is Chutz La'aretz. And when he went over there to learn Torah, and what did the Talmidim have? So the Talmidim, that's the minig until today, in the yeshivas, they have the worst food. Not in Yoek. Yoek has the best food. But it used to be, and you're going to yeshiva, and what did they have? They had the simplest bread. In Portuguese, it's called pãozinhos. So they had what they called it chem tosenu. Now, these breads were so nothing burgers that it had no taste. So they wanted to add the taste. What did they do? So they used to be jugs that would contain fish brine. And they would place the breads on top of the jugs. Again, the same thing of our Mishnah. Not that the fish brine went until the top. There was a container of fish brine. And they would, why did they put the bread in it? So like this, there'll be epis tam in the bread. Nebuch. So he says, I remembered that when we used to go to yeshiva to Rabbi Shai and Kei Sodom to learn Torah, we would put our ponzinus al gabe kevutim shalmurias on these jugs containing fish brine. And why did we do it? Daf tzaddik gimel v'hayinu tayamim batam murias. Okay. Now let me ask you a question. According to Rab Meir, then not the way the Marav folded, we're saying that in our Mishnah, Rab Meir holds that the wine itself goes into the bread. So he says, the law ke Rab Yehuda. According to Rab Yehuda, what does it really say in our Mishnah? That it doesn't draw the wine. It doesn't draw the wine. The fact that their bread tasted like the murias is araya, not like Rabbi Yehuda. In other words, he's telling you, I know the Mishnah. We did it. And I know that the bread tastes like the item in the liquid that was inside. Now you can argue maybe the 7 liquids is one thing, and maybe the fish, these fishy fishes that smelled, the Gemara gives a better answer. The Gemara says no. That no proof. Mahalimim hayu. The rolls were cut. Now this is important. This is very important. Why is that important? I'll tell you something. When you have bread, the outer layer of the bread is called crust in English. What is crust then? Hard. Big difference. The hardness of the crust prevents the bread from absorbing. The moment you cut it, if the breads were cut, even Rabbi Yehuda will be moide in our Mishnah that the wine is aser lezadim. That's what the Gemara is saying. And now there's a final question. Now we're speaking about a Choshen Mishpat question, not Yeridea. Are you not stealing from the owner? If we're saying that it absorbs, are you allowed to? The Yeshiva Bachram didn't own the Murias. Is that not called theft? That's a good question. Answers the Gemara. They got permission. Who says they didn't get permission?
No.
I think so. Then he's asking Zenenev Zeli Chaser. I'm going back to learn the Mishnah, not the way the Marafulda learned it. That some of the wine goes into the bread, some of the fish brine goes into the rolls, and the Zech Chaser. But the Yeshiva Bachrim, they were very compassionate, and they allowed the Yeshiva Bachrim Nebuch to put their nothing of that. That was their food, to put the bread on top of the fish brine. For me, it made the bread much worse. It's hard to understand how it worked. I would rather not having fish brine in my bread, but that's as